Today is the 6th of January 2021, and this is a conversation between Emilio Longo and Ted Dansey. Ted, welcome to Skill-Based Art, a learning resource for art students and artist teachers. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thanks very much, Emilio. It's a pleasure. Thanks for considering me for this particular event. Thank you.
You're most welcome, Ted. Let's get started with a biographical overview. Ted, you are an established Australian watercolourist who has worked for over 35 years in a tonal impressionist tradition. Native Australian scenery forms the basis of your work, which includes beaches, the bush, country towns, and cityscapes illuminated in subtle light. Throughout your life, you have taught at some of Australia's most prestigious artist societies, including the Heidelberg Artist Society, the Whitehorse Arts Association, as well as the Victorian Artist Society, the Watercolour Society of Victoria, and the Hobson Bay Art Society, which you are a member of. You have had more than 17 successful solo exhibitions since 2000, as well as a number of group shows throughout Australia and abroad, including being selected as one of the artists to show in the Fabriano in Acquarello exhibition in Fabriano, Italy in 2019, as well as being selected again in 2020. You were the manager of the Victorian Artist Society for 11 years, finishing in 2012, and the year prior you were made a fellow and have continued to teach workshops there throughout the years. In 2017, you won the ANL Maritime Art Award valued at $15,000. Adding to this list, you have won a multitude of awards for various art prizes, which include the Bayside Art Show in 2013 and 2018, a prize winner in the Camberwell Art Show in 2014, the Flinders Art Show also in 2014, the Moonee Valley Art Show in 2015, 2016, 2017 and 2019, and the Hobson Bay Rotary Art Show in 2015 and 2017. Furthermore, you won Artist of the Year for the Victorian Artist Society in 2007, as well as the Vass Gordon Moffat Award in 2011. Today you continue to paint and teach and are regularly contacted for workshops and demonstrations. You are represented by Panoply Gallery in Melbourne and Artistic Picture Framing in Carlton. Born 1953 in Tasmania, you moved to Melbourne in 1959 and grew up in the suburb of Glenroy. You attended St. Oliver Plunkett's Primary School, followed by Hadfield High School. Would you say that as a child you were artistically inclined?
I've always drawn for as long as I can remember, which goes back to when I was probably 8 or 9, 7 or 8 or 9. I picked up a pen, I started drawing, and I wasn't any good at anything else, so I might as well stick with what I was good at.
Sure. Did you come from an artistic family at all, Ted?
Not particularly. My mother came from an artistic family. My cousins and aunties and people like that, they could all draw and paint. My mother was very good at flower arranging, as I remember.
Wow.
And she had an artistic sort of knack of being able to make things look right. So, yeah.
Sure. So you grew up with people that were kind of sensitive to the visual world around them, so to speak. Yeah. You started drawing at 8 years old using pencils, textures, and a small watercolor set. Observing your drawing and painting, your mother would say, quote, "You're a dreamer, Ted," unquote. However, she was also encouraging, and this filled you with motivation to keep on going. Is it precisely at this time that you decided you would become an artist?
I can't really put my finger on the day when I said, yeah, I'll be an artist. To me, that was just something that I always wanted to be, an artist. And I suppose, when you get to the end of your high school education and Mum said, what are you going to do? I said, well, I want to be an artist. And she said, well, there's no money in that. Better go out and get a real job. So pretty much I always wanted to be an artist. But I got into the commercial side of art.
Absolutely, sure. Once you finished high school, your aim was, quote, to find a job that pays, all the while keeping it as creatively stimulating as possible, unquote. This led you to becoming a ticket writer for a haberdashery and clothing store. You then made olive oil cans in a factory, followed by working in a track gang laying sleepers for the railways, prior to transferring to the graphic design department, which saw you occupy key roles as creative director and senior designer with the state government of Victoria and the Premier's private office, working with former Premier of Victoria, Jeff Kennett. In the evenings, you studied sign writing at Melbourne School of Printing, Decorating and Sign Crafts for 4 years, and illustrative graphic design via correspondence also for 4 years. This seems to have been a very busy period in your life. However, I understand your time as a graphic designer introduced you to working with a vast array of media, including gouache, acrylics, and markers. Can you recall these years and how they helped you develop your artistic vision?
It's a tricky question, that one, Emilio. I've always felt that I'm creative anyway, so certainly working in these fields, it does open you, it opens your creative mind a little bit. Working in the commercial side of these fields means that you've got to be creative, you've got to be able to visualise, and I suppose you learn to take a brief. So you're always doing these things for other people, and they're not always the things you want, they're what they want. And yeah, so it does open your mind creatively.
Sure.
You're forever researching what others have done, working out what's going to be best for your client, what's going to be good for the subject. Quite often what the client wants is not what really going to sell the object, the subject that you're concentrating on. So, yeah, it does.
So it really helped you develop your ability to work in
Yes,
different media?
It did, because I always wanted to be an illustrator and a painter, and I guess I was always looking for ways in which I could introduce that. So I didn't need a lot of coaxing. It was more that I was coaxing the client to say, I think this will be really good for you.
Sure.
So I was always trying to introduce a bit of illustration and something into the what was required by the client.
Sure. So the reason why you chose to move into graphic design rather than doing an art course was because it resulted in money.
Yes.
Obviously.
Look, now I tended to fall into graphic design.
Okay.
In that when I was transferred to the graphic design section of the railways, one, it was to get away from the track gang, and two, because they wanted me to do things that I didn't want to do. And I was lucky that I had a road foreman who was prepared to, pull a few strings and get me where I wanted to be. I hope that answers your question, because,
Sure.
I think, graphics, I wasn't aware that when I was going there that this was graphic design.
Right.
Or as they called it back then, commercial art.
Mm-hmm.
Then became graphic design, then it became straight graphics, and then something else, but it's still the same thing.
Sure.
You know, irrespective of what you call it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Good. Whilst working as a graphic designer for the Premier's office, you were assigned to create a logo for the famous slogan, Victoria on the Move. Can you explain more about the process of working with Jeff Kennett to create the typography?
Yeah, Jeff Kennett was an interesting person to work for. He knew what he wanted, and he didn't go into a lot of detail about something. He'd come into your office and say, we're going to change the Garden State, or whatever it was at the time, to Victoria on the Move.
Sure.
And I need you to make it work for me as a visual concept. So one of the things we worked on was the design of the V, for V for Victoria, naturally, and that came about from a bit of research and an old insignia that had been designed maybe 100 years before that had like a crest with the Southern Cross inside it.
Mm.
And I thought, well, I think we can make that work for the V. So we came up with a V shape, triangle, put the crown on the top, and the state government's our state government's Southern Cross.
Okay.
Right. The Southern Cross on the state government flag, the Victorian flag, is different to the Southern Cross on the Australian flag.
Okay, right.
Okay.
Sure.
And we fitted that into the V. We've had the crown on the top, and I just used an italic typeface for On the Move, which was On the Move.
Sure.
It was just, to find an italic typeface seemed more obvious.
Sure. So that logo or that slogan actually went onto the number plates.
That went onto the number plates, and it was
then
then used in a number of other logos. The V was used in a number of other logos that were all designed around keeping it uniform.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty incredible, Ted, knowing that you were behind
Yeah.
the design of that particular logo, because it was so prominent back in. I mean, I remember in the early '90s seeing it on a lot of the number plates.
Yeah, that's
in
right.
cars, etc. Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, look, and to be honest with you, it always feels a little bit special.
Yeah.
To look at something. Oh, I did that.
Fantastic.
But nobody knows, so
Sure.
you get a bit of self-satisfaction out of it.
Definitely.
Yeah.
After leaving your position as a railway worker and senior designer for the state government after 21 years, you became the production manager and art director for a leading Victorian media company titled Leeds Media Starcom Worldwide. You maintained this position for 4 years. Can you recall some of your experiences working in this position and how it contributed to your artistic development?
Right. As far as artistic development, I'm not sure that it helped me a lot. The position itself came about through a discussion I had with Paul Leeds, who was Leeds Media. And I was just talking to him one day and I said, "How's it going, Paul?" And he said, "Oh, it's going all right." He said, "We've got this, we've picked up a big contract and we've got a few things going. I've got four graphic design students there, but I've just got no one to manage them." I said, "Oh, yeah? What's the money like?" And he said, "Well, if you're interested," he said, "it's yours." Anyway, I let it go for about a week or so, and I rang him up, and I just felt I'd had enough at the Premier's office, and I thought, no, maybe it's time to move on. And I gave Paul a ring and said, "Look, if the job's still there, what do you want me to do? What does it entail?" And he said, "Well, you just got to come in and manage these guys." So when I went in to manage them, I found that they were working on classified ads, and they were trained as graphic designers. And for classified ads, what you want is a typographer, not a graphic designer, because it's too boring for them. It's not creative enough. So we set about changing a few things and trying to get some of them involved in maybe commercial ads, more sort of creative types through different clients. And the others, we ended up swapping them out,
Sure.
to be honest with you. They sort of got itchy feet and wanted to move, and we brought in typographers that could sit down and set a classified ad, make it fit to a space and make it look good. And, we redesigned. We'd looked at a lot of our clients. We redesigned all their ads, set up a template. And from a graphics point of view, that part was enjoyable.
Sure.
So you get to work with different clients. People like the CAE, CFA, some of the bigger horse traders like Arrowfield from Sydney, William Inglis from out the back of Tullamarine there, and also in Sydney, Chatswood in Seymour.
Mm-hmm.
They were more creative
Sure.
ads, and they were good to work with.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
A lot of the ads were government ads, and they were just straight classified ads for a job. You've got to make them look like a job ad.
Right.
So
that's where the creativity came into it. Right.
yeah. We redesigned them. We tried to make them look a little bit more individual, so that if you had a CFA ad and you had a Department of Premiers ad sitting next to each other, that they're not going to look like the same ad. They have to look different.
Absolutely.
You know.
Yeah. So that's quite a change for you, because you came from the railways, working on the railways, to having a job as an art director.
Yeah.
You must have been, were you a lot more happier in that particular position?
Yeah, look, I was happy, and the job was good. The people were good. Advertising people are certainly different. Okay, they're a lot more forthright. They'll tell you what they think off the top of their head. But sometimes they can be a little bit. I found some people can be a little bit plastic. Okay,
Right.
I think of plastic people as being. They're not as honest as you want them to be.
Okay.
You know, like they'll certainly tell you what they think and everything else, but it's what they're saying elsewhere. They're not honest with you.
I see.
When I worked in a factory, you could meet more honest people, more down to earth. So the different people you got to work with, different personalities.
Yeah.
I think when you work with different personalities, it certainly helps to develop your managerial skills.
Sure.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
it really does, because you got to learn how to handle different people.
Right. Right.
Yeah, creatively, I'm not sure. It certainly didn't help me artistically, except for the fact that I kept painting.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's what I was going to ask in the next question. During these years working in various jobs, you maintained a practice of oil painting from home. In your own experience, what did you take away from your time working in oils, and what do you find to be the pros and cons of the medium?
Oils, very interesting if you want to be in control of your subject.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I often joke about it with people that oils are people who they're control freaks.
Okay.
They're people who want to be in control, and they can be in control of the medium, make it do what they want to do. Watercolourists, on the other hand, are people who are already in control, so they don't really care.
Sure.
Okay?
That's an interesting contrast.
Yeah.
Sure.
I find that oil painters are very serious,
Mm-hmm.
and watercolourists a bit more fun. So
That's an interesting observation.
I think if you want to become an oil painter, if you want to be serious, go out and become an accountant. Otherwise, paint watercolours.
Sure. That's an interesting contrast. I like that. One day you discovered watercolour painting when you found a palette of pan watercolours and experimented with the medium. From that point forward, you were hooked. You became partial to the medium, and as you have put it, quote, "It took me back to my childhood. I took to it easily and then made the switch from oils." Furthermore, you state, quote, "It's how you can retain light and transparency that is so unique to the watercolour painting medium. You need to know ahead what outcome you want, and you need to be prepared to lose paintings," unquote. What was it about watercolour that drew you closer to the medium and made you give up working in oils?
Well, I guess I needed to do a job for a client, Beeline Travel, at the time. They wanted me to do a job for them that required photography. And I thought, well, I've got to present them with something and say, okay, I want our photographer to go out and get photos of this, this and this. But I need to show them like a visual board first.
Sure.
And we had a range of different materials you could work with. But with 16 or 17 people, they weren't always there to use.
Mm-hmm.
when we were in the office. I had the watercolour pan there, and I took them out and I started mucking around with them. And they were just I think we were doing, it was a scene from the place out in Ballarat, Cryle Castle, somewhere like that.
Mm-hmm.
There were people on horseback and that, and I thought, well, I'll do some quick sketches of this. I'll drop a bit of type onto it, and I'll go back to the client and say, look, this will work for us.
Mm-hmm.
If we can get our photographer to take this shot again
Yeah.
in better lighting and whatever, and we use this type, and I think this will all work for us. I took them back the illustration that I'd done, which was pretty rough, and they fell in love with it.
Mm.
And I said, well, what do we need a photographer for? Why can't we just use the illustration?
Sure.
And that was pretty much the start of me using watercolours in graphic design.
Wow, that's incredible.
And I just loved the way it sort of flowed off the brush, and I thought, why have I been mucking around in oils for so long when it was painful? I just couldn't get anything I wanted. And I'd look at other people's oils and I think, well, they're really good. Why can't I do that?
Sure.
And I'm just not built for water. I'm not built for oils.
Sure.
You know, watercolour was, I think it found me, and that's what I wanted to do. And, you know, let's face it, when you're a kid, your parents give you a little thing of watercolours. They don't give you a thing of oils because they know you'll get it everywhere.
That's
They give you
true.
watercolour.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
little square pants and, you know,
Absolutely.
and you muck around with them, and it just took me back, and I thought, well, this is what it's all about.
So from that point forward, you were
Yeah.
working strictly with watercolour?
Yeah, look, I do have some oils.
Mhm.
I've still got a box of them up there somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I've actually got one of my oil paintings right down the back here of somewhere in, you know, in Mooney Ponds.
Yeah.
But no, I'm really not interested in oils that much anymore.
Because
I
you
like other people's oils.
Sure. Because you spent some time working in casein, didn't you?
Yeah, I worked in, I think it was called Placker. It used to come in little jars like poster paints, used to. And when I started in the railway offices, they had that,
Mm-hmm.
and they were all using it. And yeah, I used that for a long time. And you know, we had an opportunity to paint some big murals for 20 foot by 8 foot, and I thought, you know, we used Placker. We bought in big tins of it,
Sure.
you know, that they used for you know, training exercises and that.
Right. So you don't work with casein anymore, do you, Ted?
Look, I haven't seen it available anywhere.
Okay.
You know,
Right. Right.
I know I've spoken to people who used to supply it, like seniors, and yeah, they always talk about how good it was,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know whether they sell it anymore either.
Sure.
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. In 1990, you discovered the Victorian Artists Society, and between 1991 to 1992, you studied watercolour painting there with David Taylor. Can you provide some background information on David and the training that he put you through?
Yeah, look, firstly, discovering the Victorian Artists Society, I just happened to be walking past one day. I was on my way to see a specialist about the nose because I have a lot of sinus problems.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a big sign on this, you know, beautiful old building that said Victorian Artists Society, and it listed, you know, that he classes and live drawing and all this sort of stuff down the side. I said, I've got a bit of time, I'll drop in and have a look. And the woman there said to me, you know, we run classes and all this sort of stuff, and, you know, if you like, we'll put your name on the waiting list. And
Mm.
I said, oh, yeah, okay. You know, because I'd been using watercolours a bit, but I just felt that I wasn't getting the best out of them.
Sure.
And I really wanted to you just try and get something more out of it, I guess, you know.
Right.
And they managed to get me into the class with David Taylor. The only problem I had with that was I was working for the Premier's office at the time, and that meant that all our ads had to be at the paper on Thursday afternoon
Okay.
or Thursday evening, 4 o'clock at the latest. It was only over at the Herald Sun. Could walk them across. We didn't have, digital, digital back in those days, so we had to pre-use bromides and things in the dark room. And I was one out, so the classes were on Thursdays, which meant they ran from 1 till 3:30. I used to go up there, and I was only there for about an hour. I'd have to go back and finish the ads and send them off.
Sure.
So I missed a lot, and but I was always there for David's demo, and I was always there for his critique. He used to critique. He'd give us homework, and he'd critique it for us. Very giving person, David.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, as I explained to you earlier, he's not the sort of guy that was trying to clone his students. He didn't want them all to paint the same as him, just to learn how to use the medium, and then you develop how you're going to use it.
Sure.
By yourself.
Sure.
So, David's probably taught some of the best watercolourists in Victoria. Not a lot of them mention him as being their first tutor, but you know that he was.
Sure.
You know.
Sure. So, it's interesting. So your training with David was only on that Thursday?
Yeah, on a Thursday.
So once a week on a Thursday is when you would meet with him?
Yeah.
Sure. So David's up in Phillip Island now, Ted?
He's in Phillip Island, yeah. He's got his own little place that he bought up there, a purpose-built studio that he's just rebuilt, quite large. Studio come gallery, big as a small house, I believe.
Sure. Wow. Yeah, he's doing really well. He's got his own DVDs.
Oh, yeah.
I think he's got his own series of brushes out as well.
Yeah, he has, Yeah, his brushes are neat brushes. They're Sable, the clear handle ones. They're a fantastic brush.
Fantastic, great.
Yeah, a lot of them do have their own brushes now.
Yeah.
Joseph, I think, works with the Escoda brushes.
That's Joseph Zuberik?
Yep. He uses he has Escoda, he has a couple of Escoda, the synthetic hair perler brushes that carry his name.
Sure.
I know that Alvaro has the mop brushes, which are the ones I use, the red handle ones.
Sure.
They're a Neef brush as well. Neef, I find, they produce a really good brush.
Right.
And they're fairly economical. So.
Sure. Not too costly as well.
No, and these things cost a lot of money, and I find that you're better off just going out and buying them and forgetting about how much it cost you.
Sure.
Because then you'll get too precious, you know.
Right, no, that
you
makes
still
sense.
got to use them.
That's it, that's right.
Yeah.
Taking a leap of faith forms part of the watercolour painting process, as it can be an unforgiving medium. As you put it, quote, it's risk-taking. It's like the bungee jumping of art. You just have to go for it. Commit to it, and it may or may not work out. There's a rush and intensity you experience that you don't get when you do oil paintings, unquote. I understand creating paintings in watercolour can be a little hit and miss at times. Do you find that when you make a mistake in a painting, is it better to go with it or to stop and start again on another piece of paper?
You're better off not trying to fix things. Some things can be fixed, but most of the time you're better off learning from it and making sure that you don't make the same mistake the next time.
Sure.
Watercolour is hit and miss because of the way it can move around when it's wet, you know, more than anything. And you get these little cauliflower or backflows that you get from it from time to time, and you won't realise that it's actually happening until you get to the end of the painting. And suddenly you're here, you look back here and you see this big sort of creep back, which is hard to explain, but they happen. For me, that's part of watercolour. That's just what happens.
Right.
So you just go with it. If it's not dragging your attention away from your focal point, then just live with it.
Sure.
You know, it doesn't necessarily mean you've got a bad painting because you've got this little backflow, where some people would think you have, but to me it's not. It's part of watercolour.
Right.
It's part of the joy of watercolour, and sometimes you got to make these little mistakes work for you.
Sure.
Okay.
So it's really about embracing your mistake.
It is, yeah.
Rather than regretting it when it comes to watercolour.
That's right. I often say to my students, find what you're doing well and make sure you keep doing it well. Then find what you have to work on and work on it to get it up to scratch.
Sure.
But whatever you do, don't spend all your time working on your mistakes and forgetting about what you do well, because they'll end up transposing.
Right.
Right. So what you're doing not so well will suddenly become fantastic, but what you used to do well will suddenly become not so great.
Yeah. That's interesting.
So you've got to, you've still got to concentrate on the things you do well.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I understand there are times when you still take out the oils for old time's sake. At this point in your life, do you wish to develop your work further in the medium of oil?
No, I don't. As I say, I have my oil paints up there, and I keep them there as a reminder of just how bad things can be.
That's interesting. It's because it's a fascinating kind of rivalry, the story between the watercolorists and painters. What's your take on that? Since you've been painting watercolor for a long time now.
Yeah, I have. And look, I love oil paintings. I love people who work in pastel.
Yeah.
I've got a good friend, Barbara McManus, works in pastels.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I like all mediums, and I appreciate them all. And for me, it's watercolour. I don't see any rivalry, to be honest with you. They're different.
Sure.
There only becomes a rivalry when people want to compare them.
Yeah, that's true.
And if you don't try to compare them and you treat them for what they are, then, there's no rivalry. I don't think so.
Well, a lot of painters throughout history have used both oils and watercolour as well. Perhaps more watercolour for a study and an oil painting for more as a finished piece.
Yeah, and there's a painter around at the moment, you've probably heard of Ross Patterson, who works in pastels, oils and watercolours, and he's equally as good in any of them.
That's great.
Max Wilkes, I know, will work on watercolours, but he won't tell anyone. But Max does a lot of pastel work as well as oils.
Sure. It's important to try, though. If you're an oil painter, it's important to give watercolour a go. If you're a watercolourist, it's important to try oils, because you might not know what you're missing out on.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure. You're an avid plein air painter, as you state, quote, "It's real, and nature is one of my greatest motivators. You get a sense of freedom. You see things differently, and the light is different outside. The range of tones are broader, and you feel the atmosphere. You paint the experience. It's better than yoga. Sometimes there might even be someone standing behind me, and I wouldn't have a clue," unquote. However, not all of your paintings are finished en plein air. In fact, you have two different approaches to painting landscapes. The first being the conventional en plein air approach, whereby you start and finish the painting out in the field, and the second approach involves creating a colour study of the scene en plein air and then going back to your studio and creating a larger studio painting while using the colour study as a reference. How do you decide which approach you will use for a particular scene?
Look, I tend to paint outdoors a lot, and I'll do quite a number of smaller quarter sheet paintings. And then it becomes a little bit like what we did here today, is that I'll go through them. Some of them have worked, and I think, great, I'm not going to touch it. Others might need a little bit of tweaking, and I'll have a painting out of them. I think that's good. And then others, I think, I wouldn't mind doing a bigger painting of that, because I think it'll work in a larger scale. And if you're going to have an exhibition, you don't want to have everything the same size. Sometimes it's nice to have a bigger painting, maybe overpriced, and if people think, wow, but I can't afford that, maybe I can afford a little one.
Sure.
But no, it's a bit of a challenge to work larger. Some people I know work large outdoors, full sheet. People like Amanda Hyatt will set up and work out in the wind and the rain, and God knows how she does it,
Mm-hmm.
but she does.
Mm-hmm.
Me, I like quarter sheet to half sheet, maximum outdoors.
Sure.
And then I'll work up a full sheet, or maybe the larger elephant sheet, or I've got a big roll that I use to make something larger indoors.
Mm-hmm.
Full sheets more for exhibitions.
Mm-hmm.
Anything larger than that, it's more to challenge myself.
Mm-hmm.
It's about, to see whether I can actually make this a bigger painting and make it work the same way as I did indoors.
Sure.
Because, to lay a wash outdoors, you only got to take your arm that far. If you're
Right.
working big, you've got to be able to lay a wash this big.
Yeah.
You've got to be able to work, mix the colours. It is a bit of a challenge.
Sure.
And I guess I like that challenge.
Sure.
Yeah.
So just observing even your storage shelf you have all your paintings,
Yeah.
one can start to understand that you've worked in pretty much a variety of scales throughout
Yeah.
your life, but nowadays you're working more at a consistent scale, whereas you're not going too big.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I try not to get too big because they're just clogging up my shed. So
Sure.
if you know anybody,
Fantastic. I understand watercolor is a faster medium to work with than oils because of the drying time. On average, how long do you spend on a plein air painting as opposed to a studio painting?
yeah, look, plein air painting a little bit different. It'll depend on the weather. On a cold day, it dries slower. Okay, in those really cold days, trying to get the water to dry, it's not all that easy. On a hot day, it'll dry too quick.
Sure.
So that has its challenges. I think that's one of the things I like, that challenge. But I suppose, plein air, I don't spend sort of more than, say, from a half an hour to an hour and a half max.
Okay.
All right? That'd be I wouldn't, no, in fact, I'd take that back to an hour.
An hour.
An hour max,
Okay.
yeah. In the studio, I can take as long as I like because it's controlled.
Sure.
If I'm waiting for a wash to dry, I go up and have a coffee,
Mm-hmm.
put the TV on, or put a CD on, and play a
Sure.
bit of Joe Cocker or something.
Sure. So it's interesting. Do you find if you spend more than that 1 hour out in the field that you tend to lose the impression?
Yeah.
You do?
I'm not someone who can labour over something. I want to get it done and down. I can't work on a painting over a series of days
Sure.
because I find I just lose. There's something mentally that I lose.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people would say I've lost it anyway. But you lose that sort of sense of immediacy that you want to get something down. And watercolour, I think, works best when it's immediate.
Sure.
A lot of oil painters I know will set up a still life and spend days on it.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
And I'm amazed at that because I think, wow, how can you go away from a subject and come back with the same sort of inner feeling about getting it done?
Yeah, it is interesting,
Yeah.
because really when you've started the painting
Yeah.
and you get midway through it, there's a certain, you remain kind of invigorated by the process, but that tends to taper off as you get further along the process.
Yeah.
And to stop and to come back into that mood, that's challenging to get
It
back
is.
there, definitely. Moving on. After leaving your position as production manager and art director at Leeds Media Starcom Worldwide, you became the secretary and manager of the Victorian Artists Society. Subsequently, after leaving this position, you began to paint and teach full-time in 2012. As you put it, quote, teaching just happened, unquote. Have you found that teaching has made you a better artist over the years?
Better is, I think, is for other people to judge.
Mm.
It's certainly, I've found I'm more confident because teaching and demonstrating, running workshops, I find that, teaching, you're imparting your knowledge on other people and you have to articulate what it is that you're doing for a reason.
Yeah.
because every brushstroke has a purpose. And you can't just put it down and people say, well, why did you do that? You've got to be able to articulate. Sometimes you do that and hope that they don't ask the question. But other times, you have to answer. So you need to articulate. Most of the time, it's because it feels right.
Sure.
Or you needed to put it there for balance.
Mm-hmm.
Something had to balance, and you put this brushstroke down to help it balance. Demonstrating is a little bit different because you normally have a crowd of people and you're there to entertain them.
That's right.
Okay?
Yeah.
If you're not entertaining them, they'll just start talking amongst themselves and
Right.
they're not paying attention.
Sure.
Especially if you're trying to do a demonstration for the Watercolour Society, because they all paint watercolour anyway. Okay, so so there is a difference. So I think it's made me more confident as a painter in that I need to produce something a little bit quicker.
Mm-hmm.
I've got to be able to step them through it, because when I teach, I demonstrate,
Mm-hmm.
and I demonstrate in sections.
Sure.
Right, step 1, step 2, step 3,
Mm-hmm.
and if I'm not confident in what I'm doing, then you can't expect your students to learn.
Absolutely.
So,
It's almost like performing a little bit,
Yeah.
isn't it? Giving a demonstration.
it
I
is,
found
yeah.
that to be. Sure. I understand your teaching is based on the fundamentals of watercolor, tone, color, and design. Students learn the importance of good drawing, technique, and visualizing the composition. Your classes are primarily landscape-based and include seascape, cityscape, and still life on occasions. What method of drawing do you teach, and how do you find your students respond to it?
yeah, I take them through a range of drawing techniques. We'll go through, from shading to hatching and drawing with a pen, contour line drawing,
Mm-hmm.
single line, just following a line. So there's a range of different drawing techniques that I take them through.
Mm-hmm.
The purpose of that is that one person might find it fantastic to be able to do contour drawing,
Mm-hmm.
and that might sit with them really good, and they can do all their stuff in contour, all their watercolour paintings and that, they can do a simple contour drawing.
Sure.
Other people are different, and they like to be a little bit more intricate, and they might like to get a little bit of shading in. It's up to them to pick which suits them best,
Sure.
but to know what's available to them.
Absolutely.
Sure.
I found that a lot of watercolorists, Ted, tend to have a specific technique they use when they're drawing. It's
Yeah.
quite loose. I mean, it's based
Yeah.
on line. It's a linear drawing. It's quite fluid. And that is quite conducive to the actual watercolor painting process itself. So when it comes to actually building up a drawing with rendering,
Yeah.
is that something you find that would only occur when you're working on a drawing to finish it as a drawing, rather not working as a watercolor
No,
painting?
definitely no. One of the processes I use with students is we'll get pencils out, which is almost against my religion to draw in pencils these days. I find that I just tend to draw with a pen, a fine liner pen. But we'll get the soft lead pencils out, even the water soluble graphites.
Sure.
We'll do our drawing, give it a bit of a smudge and work it around with a bit of water, and then put a watercolour straight over the top of it.
Okay. Right.
It's sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, but people need to know that these are options that are open to them.
Mm-hmm.
You're not just stuck in a little bubble where or you're not allowed to do this or you're not allowed to do that. You can do anything.
Sure.
There's no law. Yet they're not going to cart you off to the funny farm because you're not doing it the way this guy did it, and he says that's the way it's got to be done.
Sure.
There's no correct way. There's only what works.
That's interesting.
That's what works for you.
So you're quite open with your teaching methodology. Yeah. You don't have a set rule or set way of working.
No, I don't. I tend to, most of my painting is sort of fairly, you work light to dark and from distance to close up and things like that, and from, where you put in the detail at the end and things like that. But there are times when you get a subject that needs to change, that dictates that you need to put in your darks early sometimes,
Right.
and then you'll wash over them.
Mm-hmm.
So there's, there is more than one way of doing something.
Absolutely. Coming back to the Victorian Artists Society, as mentioned previously, you came to discover the VAS in 1990 and joined watercolour classes with David Taylor the following year. Eventually, you became the manager of the VAS. How did you come to start teaching there, and how did you secure the management position?
Right, I was working for Leeds at the time, and the manager at the VAS was retiring, and they advertised for the position.
Okay.
I'd had 4, good years at Leeds, and I just found that it was very taxing.
Okay.
Okay, I was leaving home at 6:30 in the morning, getting home maybe 7 or 8 o'clock at night.
Wow. Yeah.
My kids were younger then. I wouldn't see them in the morning, and they were ready for bed when I got home. And I thought, well, maybe it's time that I sort of stepped down a little bit. And I always wanted to paint. I just thought a job like that would help me get closer to becoming an artist,
Sure.
as opposed to a graphic artist.
Right. Right.
And so I applied for the position and went for the interview, and they rang me up and said, yeah, you can have the job.
That's fantastic.
It wasn't a career move up at all. It was a career move more sideways.
Sideways, yeah.
And it meant taking quite a dip in salary, because at the end of the day, how much do we need to live? I mean, is it all about money, or is it all about, your quality of life, I guess? And so I took the job on, and it was a bit of a challenge when I got there.
Sure. So was it a fixed term position, or was it ongoing?
No, it was a fixed term. It was, no, not a fixed term. It was a full-time position.
Okay. Okay.
5 days a week, and
Sure. Sure.
9 to 5, pretty regular hours.
Well, that's great, because it allowed you to spend time with your family, which is obviously
and it
very
got
important.
me more involved with art.
Absolutely.
More involved with painting. I was able to show my paintings somewhere.
Sure.
Because I certainly hadn't been involved in any galleries at that time.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So what were your duties during the 11 years that you held the management position at the Victorian Artists Society?
Yeah. The job itself was the day-to-day running of the society, which include membership, gallery bookings, classes, workshops, the advertising, whatever little they did. Most of it was done in-house. Pretty much just the day-to-day operations.
Sure. Was it a challenging job, or fairly straightforward?
Yeah, it was. It was certainly more challenging. Let's just say that when I went for the interview, there were certain things that were left out.
Okay.
That suddenly popped up when I took the job on.
Right.
Oh, hello. I don't recall you mentioning that at the interview.
Sure.
But it was good. I mean, it was good to get involved with a lot of the different artists and have that interaction with different people, and people who were not necessarily household names. They were great painters, and you think, why isn't this person getting the same recognition as this person?
Right.
So because there are a lot of good painters around, and I guess I was, some of the people there I just love them.
Sure.
Yeah.
Did you, when you were in that position, did you find that you had time to join in on some of the workshops and paint a little?
Look, I did join in on a couple of workshops, but I found that the day-to-day operations often interrupted those workshops, and I'd have to sort of leave them and go back to the office. And look after this person or that person. I did have an office assistant,
Mm-hmm.
and she worked 3 days a week.
Sure.
3 half days, kind of. Yeah.
So you were responsible for opening and closing VAS during that
Yeah,
time?
yeah. I'd come in early, open up, make sure all the lights were set up, turn on, you know. Their finances when I got there were pretty rock bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So one of the first things I did was to get rid of the cleaner who was costing us too much.
Okay, right.
And I went back to my old boss and said, look, how about donating something for us because I want to buy a vacuum cleaner and I'm going to vacuum the building. I'll do it
Oh,
myself.
wow, so you've done it yourself.
So I did that in the mornings, before we opened.
Mm-hmm.
There were other little things that I ended up doing for them. The stained glass windows were a little bit broken. I got up and fixed them up and,
Great.
fixed one of the stained glass windows in the doors that lead out into the alcove.
Mm-hmm.
I brought that home, I stripped it back and I completely redid it
Wow.
and re-leaded it and all that sort of stuff. But the Victorian Art Society, it relies a lot on donations.
Sure, it does, yeah.
And volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
And, anything that I was doing outside my regular job, I was happy to do as a volunteer.
Sure.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So that's fascinating because you're living in Essendon and you have to travel down to the city every day.
Yeah.
Did you have a designated car park?
No,
It's quite
you
hard
used to
to
catch
find
the train.
park. Oh, you used to catch a train.
Yeah.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah, you catch
Sure.
the train in, catch the train home. It was easy.
Yeah.
I believe that the previous person had a dedicated car park, but that was down the road a bit and they cut that out.
Oh, did they? Okay.
Yeah, they'd cut it out because it was costing them too much.
Sure. So that's fascinating, Ted. Considering the years that have passed since then, when you were the manager of VAS, do you feel like there was a different sort of spirit that was inside VAS at that time? A different kind of appreciation perhaps for more of the traditional kind of work? Has that changed in your own perspective?
Look, it's changed a little bit over the last few years and it's probably a good thing. I mean, they're getting in a lot of younger artists who are becoming members. I think that's a good thing.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think it's because, I think when you've had your time, it's good to be able to reflect back. It's good to be able to pass stories on to some of the younger ones, not to brag about we did it this way, we did it that way, but to try and pass on an appreciation of how it was done, how it's changed.
Mm-hmm.
Because,
Sure.
at one stage I was the young Turk in there,
Mm.
And it changed, and I was one who was changing things.
Absolutely.
So things change.
You need that different levels of wisdom. The older artists,
Yeah,
the
that's
newer
right.
artists that have just come in. It really helps. It's good for the tradition. It helps the tradition grow as well. So whilst you were at VAS, was the building? Because I know recently the VAS obviously had the refurbishment, which is great. At that time, was the building in pretty good nick, or was it starting to fall apart?
The building itself needed a lot of work on it. Okay. You would have seen it in its new state, and it's just incredible. If you've been upstairs to the galleries where they've opened up the archives, the two little things that lead out to the front, out onto the balcony, they were closed off and used as storage.
Wow. Okay.
Right. So it was just a little bit tired. It certainly needed a lot of work. The roof used to flood a lot of the time, and we had that done once when I was there.
Mm.
And the flooding often used to come in through the ladies' toilets, used to block up.
Wow.
If we had a really heavy downpour, I'd usually sort of jump in the car at night and go in there just to make sure that the hadn't blocked up, so that when we opened the ladies' toilets the next morning, it wasn't flooding out into the into the foyer area. So
sure.
yeah, and anyway, they had that all fixed up this time round.
Right.
They polished the floors, they ripped up the old carpet. They've just done so much to it, and they're quite an expense, you know.
Sure.
And you know they couldn't have done it without the president that they've got now, who just donated so much of her own money.
Sure. Sure.
You know, I don't know what their exact amount was, but you know, you wouldn't have got much change out of $1 million that they've put into it. And,
Sure.
you know,
I'm so glad that
yeah.
that actually went ahead
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah, because it's just a beautiful old building.
It
and
is.
And when I worked there, you know, I would have people walk in off the street and they'd say, "Oh, anyone used to live here?" I say, "No, it's always been an art gallery.
Mm,
You know, it's purpose built as an art gallery."
sure.
Or they'd come in and say, "Oh, I walked past this place. Never been in before. Always wondered what it was."
Hmm.
You know, so yeah, there you go. So
It's such an important part of the Australian art
it
history
is.
as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
And I feel like there are a lot of people that still don't know about it.
Well,
to this
there
day.
would be. Yeah, there's a lot of people who aren't interested in it anyway.
Yeah.
But you know, when you look back over the you know through the archives and you see that you know people like Arthur Streeton
Yeah.
was on the council there.
Yeah.
You know,
That's
for
incredible.
you know something like 8 years. William Dargy was you know on the council, and you know people like Mather and all those people who become presidents.
Sure.
Laurie Scott Pendlebury, who was you know president, and his wife Nornie Good, who was on council.
And it's incredible
you
the
know,
things that they painted in that very
yeah,
studio in the back
that's
there
right,
as well. Yeah.
And their daughter, who still volunteers at the
Is that
society,
right? Okay.
and Scott Pendlebury. You know, I mean,
That's
yeah,
fascinating.
yeah. So it's yeah. I mean, it's just worthy of its place in history, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In 2007, you won the Victorian Artists Society Artist of the Year Award. Did winning this award help bring more recognition to your work?
Yes, I think it did to a degree. I think when I started exhibiting at the Vic Art Society, that people were seeing my work then.
Okay.
But I think it was starting to get an appreciation of it at that time.
Okay.
And I think after winning the society, it sort of, you know, winning that Artist of the Year award, it sort of just reinforced, you know, to other people that, yeah, this guy is serious about his painting.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because the Artist of the Year Award, to my understanding, Ted, current members vote for the Artist of the Year, isn't it?
It's voted by your peers. So,
By your peers, yeah.
Members vote over what they call their seasonal exhibitions. They have a autumn, winter, spring,
Mm-hmm.
and then they have the Artist of the Year. Now, votes are given over the autumn, winter, spring by the member artists.
Mm-hmm.
They'll vote on 4 different ones. Those votes are tallied up,
Sure.
and then the top 30 of those will go into Artist of the Year.
I see.
Okay,
Okay, right.
And then the artists that exhibit in that vote again,
Mm-hmm.
and they always get a vote anyway. That's to stop them just voting for themselves. So they just automatically get a vote, and
Right.
then they have to put in a 3-2-1. And then the cumulative votes over the whole year are put together, and that's who wins the Artist of the Year.
I see.
Uh,
And it happens
yeah.
every year.
Yeah,
the
that's
Artist of the
right.
Year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, the last few years, it's been sponsored by Paul Little and his family,
Okay.
who are toll,
Oh, yeah.
people?
Toll people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because Paul's mother Mavis worked. She used to work at the society. Come in and sit the galleries on a Saturday when the exhibitions were on, and
I see.
do a bit to try and sell the paintings and stuff.
Fantastic.
And I think it was to keep that connection.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, when I won it, all I got was a medallion. But since they came in and started sponsoring, then Yeah, I mean, it was a $10,000 prize.
Wow.
It's worthwhile winning.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. You were made a Fellow of the Victorian Artists Society in 2011 for your contribution to the Society and art. What are the benefits of being a Fellow of the VAS?
Yeah, the benefits, there's no real benefits as far as, you're not getting free membership or anything like that. It's a recognition for, for what the fact that you've actually done something and they're recognising it.
Okay.
So it's a bit like being a fellow of anything, I guess.
Sure.
You could be a fellow of the Royal Academy, or a fellow of some sort of doctorate.
Sure.
You'll often see doctors have their fellowships listed
That's
under their
right.
big long names.
Right. Yeah.
So it's an honour to be a fellow, because they're not given out lightly.
Sure.
They were capped at 30 at some stage, but and then as people sort of fell off the perch and they became sort of another one became available.
Mm-hmm.
They may have extended that. That was fellowships are automatically now given to presidents.
Okay.
As part of their
Wow.
part of their presidency, they automatically become a fellow. I think it's just an honour. It's an honour thing.
That's a great honour, Ted, to be a fellow.
Yeah.
I'm very glad that worked out for you.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. I understand you admire the work of artists John Singer Sargent, R.W. Sturgis, Edward Seago, and Harold Herbert. All of these artists captured brilliant light, reflections, and movement while retaining delicate stillness in their paintings. I understand this aspect of watercolour is what seduced and excited you about the medium from early on. These days, do you find yourself still able to learn more about the possibilities of the watercolour medium by studying the work of the aforementioned artist, or are you past this and more interested in experimenting with effects of your own?
Well, there's a little bit of both, I guess. I don't think we can ever stop learning, and I still love getting out my books on Seago and Sturgis and, flicking through them and just looking at how they've tackled certain situations and thinking, well, I do things this way. If I was to try doing it a little bit different, maybe I can combine the both.
Mm-hmm.
So you're always looking at ways of getting better.
Sure.
And what you think is down the track, someone might look at your work and say, well, I like what he was doing 20 years ago. But in yourself, you're not doing it for them, you're doing it for you.
Exactly.
And you're always looking at ways that you can get better.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to be the best I can be,
Mm.
and I don't know if I'll ever get there. I hope I never do, to be honest.
Sure.
Because if you do get there, what's the good of keep going?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
It takes away that challenge. But I think I love experimenting. I come out here in the studio and I'll get out a subject and I think I'm going to have a go at doing that this way.
Mm-hmm.
If it doesn't work out, it's just a bit of paper.
Mm-hmm.
But I've learned so much from it.
Absolutely.
Like I've learned that no, that doesn't work.
Right.
So, yeah.
Do you find nowadays, Ted, that you compare your work with artists of the past or more of your contemporaries?
I try not to compare them, to be honest.
Trying to compare.
Yeah. I like to think of trying to be a bit more individual.
Sure.
I guess what I do compare is I like to compare the subject with what I've produced.
Okay. Right.
Okay. Have I captured what I was trying to do?
Sure.
Quite often you can end up with an okay painting, but it's not what you were trying to get.
Sure.
Sometimes it can be better. You think, well, I'm happy with that. It's not what I wanted, but boy, it's I'm happy with it. So
you surprise yourself.
Yeah, but I try not to compare myself with other painters because they're all individual.
Yeah.
And they're doing things how they want to do it.
Sure.
I often look at them and think, geez, I wish I could paint as good as that.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But I paint different. So
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. I understand you paint on a full sheet of Arch 300 DSM watercolor paper on a flat easel set to a slight angle at hip height. You favor other brands of paper such as Manani and Fabriano as well. Your brushes are always mops and rounds, and you don't use flats or squares. You use the same brush most of the time in a variety of ways. In fact, you often advise your students to get a favorite brush and stick to it. An impressionist at heart, your views on the painting process is as follows. Quote, "My philosophy for painting is no different than my philosophy in life. It's probably why I chose watercolor over other mediums. Like life, if you try to complicate it, you'll end up in a mess. Keep it simple, see the beauty and paint from the heart. Don't go back into it. Let the accidents happen. There's no right or wrong in painting. However, every brushstroke has a purpose," unquote. Can you provide a summary of your painting process from drawing to initial wash through to the finishing touches?
Yeah, sure. Well, I like to go out and find a subject that I like to paint. I'll look at something and think, yeah, that's appealing to me. So firstly, the subject has to appeal. And then I'll set myself up, make sure that I'm comfortable, and quite often I'll start off with a quick little sketch,
Okay,
right? Just to make sure that I think the composition's going to work, because quite often we'll be focused here and your subject's out here, like what you're looking at, plein air is out here.
definitely.
So I'll do a little thumbnail, I guess, and just try to work out, is it going to work? Am I better off, making this a little bit, making my eye line higher, having more foreground, or do I want to have a low eye line and have more sky?
Mm-hmm.
So I fiddle around with things like that for only maximum of 5 minutes or something,
Okay,
I'll set my easel up. I often don't bother with sketching at that stage unless I'm sort of it's the end of the day and I don't want to get out my paints. I'll
sure.
sketch in my sketchbook,
Mm-hmm.
and so I'll set it up. I'll sketch it in with my little fine liner pen that I like at the minimal of detail, unless I feel I need to put in a little bit more.
Okay,
Right, they're decisions that you need to make along the way. It's not a predetermined thing.
mm-hmm.
Quite often it'll just be when you get down to blocking in your subject, you think, yes, I just need to put a little bit more detail here as a reminder for me when I come back to paint it that area is kind of special.
Sure.
I always look at blocking in the big areas. So when I sketch or anything, I block in the big areas first.
Okay,
Right, detail is the last thing. It's no good getting your detail right if everything else is out of whack, out of scale and everything. So once I get my big areas in, I start painting the lightest colours first, getting my light washes, my mid-tones, and then the darks and a little bit of stuff at the end,
sure.
calligraphy, and that's pretty much it.
Okay. And you use a little bit of gouache for highlights,
Yeah,
right?
yes, I prefer that than trying to cut around areas,
Mm-hmm.
because one, that slows me down,
Mm-hmm.
and often I find that it looks cut out.
Sure.
Or something, or it's a bit like masking fluid, where I find that apart from the fact that half the time it tears the paper, especially if you're using a different paper and it's very soft,
Sure.
like a blocking foot or something, it'll just tear the paper. But I often find with stuff like masking fluid is that you put it in the wrong spot. It might be where it is, but when you come to do your painting, you think, oh, it's not balancing there, it should be over there.
Sure.
You've got to have that flexibility to move things, and I just find that gouache will give me that flexibility.
Right.
Use it minimally, and usually mixed with a little bit of colour. Sometimes it's just too white.
Sure.
And if you overuse it, you tend to find that you look at your painting 3 months down the track, you see all these little white dabs everywhere and they'll annoy you that you don't notice at the time because you're engrossed in what you're doing.
Sure, that's fascinating. So, on the subject of photography,
Yeah.
Ted, does photography have any place in your practice when it comes to working out in the field?
Look, it does. I take photos wherever I go, and sometimes I'll use that photo and compare it to what I've done on site. And I usually find that the photos tend to, because they're so wide angle, I don't use a proper camera. I'll use my phone or I'll use my iPad, and I find that because they're so wide angle that they will actually distort things a little bit. They
Sure.
tend to stretch them,
Yeah.
So what you're looking at, you can fit into an area. When you get it into a photo, it's not fitting into that same area.
hmm
So I prefer to, trust myself. I'll trust my drawing.
hmm
Even if the drawing's a little bit out,
hmm
I'll know that it's where I want it.
Sure.
So I don't have a problem with people working from photos.
hmm
It's not always possible to just stop and paint plein air somewhere.
hmm
Or it's not always possible to paint the subject you want to paint plein air because you might be in the middle of a tram stop. You could be
It's true.
anywhere.
Right.
So as long as they're your photo, I think that's fine because, you've still got the memory in your mind.
Absolutely.
So I don't have a problem with people using photos. You use what you can. I mean, you can go back a couple of 100 years and they were creating devices that were going to help them then. So
Right.
it's no different. If they had cameras, they'd be using cameras.
Absolutely. That's an interesting
Yeah,
way of thinking about
yeah.
the use of photography in the painting process. I understand your palette consists of mainly transparent colours. Do you use a limited palette when painting?
Yeah, I have a certain amount of paints in my palette, and I might have one or two tubes of different colours
hmm
that I just carry around and I'll squeeze them into the lid and use them. But yeah, most of my colours are fairly transparent.
Sure.
This helps prevents you from muddying up your watercolours.
hmm
And I tend to limit myself. So there's certain colours that I use a lot of and that I use in every painting, and other colours that I don't hardly touch. And you can normally pick them out in the palette because they go hard and they start to crack, and you can see that I haven't used them.
Sure.
Yeah.
White gouache and black ink are used when necessary to add edges and highlights to your paintings. Have you ever experimented with other watercolour techniques such as using salt or acetone?
Yeah, I've experimented with them. I have a couple of things of salt in there that the only reason I really use them is to show students what they can do.
Okay.
Um, I find that, one, when I get my painting done, I don't have a need for it.
hmm
So, yeah, I'm not, I find them a little bit gimmicky, to be honest with you. You get great textures, and I know artists who use them to great effect,
hmm
and they don't spoil their watercolours. What I find with students is that they use them because they're trying to save a painting.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
They think, oh, I'll just splash a bit of salt on there, or I'll do a bit of this, or I'll throw some breadcrumbs onto it, and that'll save my painting.
Sure.
It doesn't save your painting. If you've got your painting right and you want to make a little bit of texture, good, but it's not going to save your painting.
That's right. Great advice, Ted. Your preferred brand for paints is Winsor & Newton. Have you always used this brand, and why do you favour it in particular?
Yeah, I started using Winsor & Newton from the start, and I found that the particular colours that I got were true to what I wanted. Okay, so different brands will have the same colour as a name,
Yeah.
especially something like a burnt sienna or a raw umber. When you start to use them, you'll find that In one brand, your burnt sienna is quite red,
Mm-hmm.
pardon me. In the Winsor and Newton, you'll find that it's quite a rusty colour.
Sure.
And that's the colour I like.
Mm-hmm.
When I mix it with ultramarine blue, it gives me the darkest dark that I'll ever want,
Sure.
which eliminates the need for getting black.
Mm-hmm.
It eliminates the need for getting a Payne's grey, which I find is flattens.
Right.
It's great in English landscapes maybe,
Mm-hmm.
and it's okay when it's mixed with other colours.
Mm-hmm.
I just find for the Australian landscape it flattens.
Sure.
Not everyone would agree with me,
Mm-hmm.
but that's when I use it. That's what happens.
Sure.
So, yeah, I've tried all the other brands,
Mm-hmm.
and as I said to a friend of mine once, look, I tried your, your other brand of burnt sienna, and it's red.
Mm.
And I like the burnt sienna in Winsor and Newton. And he said to me, well, yeah, but that means all you got to do is buy this colour, and it'll be the same.
Sure.
I said, yes, but if I do that for every colour, I'm going to be buying how many tubes of paint before I find the same one that gives me the colour I'm looking for.
That's true.
You know?
Sure.
And I find that, they have these days these little A4 sheets with little dots of paint on them that you can test the colour, and really they're pretty useless.
Sure.
They're good for giving to your students. It's like putting an elephant stamp on a student's work and saying, that's really good work. There you go.
Sure.
Even though, here, you can have this little...
There are a lot of different watercolours that have come out on the market,
There are,
Ted, and in recent times there have been certain watercolours that include honey in the mix, such as the M. Graham watercolour brand. Have you experimented with those brands as well?
Look, not M. Graham, but honey is something that they've been putting into watercolours for a long time, along with gum arabic.
Sure.
Okay, so you find Senelia use honey a lot, and I really like their paints as well. So it keeps it nice and fluid, I guess, especially when you use tube paints. So I have tried them out. As I say, I just tend to come back to the Winsor and Newton, even though I try these other paints out and I use them. My basic lot are Winsor and Newton.
Absolutely. Well, they got a great reputation. You can't really go wrong with Winsor and Newton. The majority of your body of work is comprised of landscapes and cityscapes, and indeed your experience in this genre definitely shines through. However, still life is something you will paint on rare occasions when giving demonstrations, and portraits and figure work appear absent altogether. Why is this so?
I tend to steer away from what I term to be studio subjects.
Okay.
Which means you set them up in your studio and you paint, there in your studio. I find that I don't mind doing, a little bit of figure work, but I only do it for me. It's never for show.
Okay.
And usually, I'll wait. Like I might get the family if they're asleep on the chair. My wife went to sleep on the chair in front of the telly one day when she was cold. Had a rug over her head, looked a bit like a nonna. So, I took that opportunity to do something. So I don't mind that. I think life drawing is essential to help you with your drawing skills. But I only ever keep those things for myself. I never show them anywhere. Still life just doesn't excite me. And another thing about painting a still life is you'll often find people who are really good still life painters, when they go to paint outdoors, plein air, to do a landscape, that their landscapes lack a depth of field.
Okay.
Right. Because in the studio you're looking from here to here.
That's true, yeah.
In the outdoors you're looking from here forever.
That's right. That's right.
And you find that, especially if they just spend so much of their time in the studio painting still life or some green bottles in a box, couple of flowers that they've plucked out of the garden and that they have this depth of field and everything looks three-dimensional and great.
Mm-hmm.
Their landscapes tend to lack that depth of field.
Sure.
Not all of them. I mean, you get a lot of people, the really good artists won't, but you find that tends to happen to a lot. They limit their tonal range
Mm-hmm.
somehow, and their backgrounds seem to come a little bit too far forward. And
Yeah. That's an interesting observation. Definitely. Yeah.
So I just tend to steer clear of studio subjects because they just don't excite me.
Sure. Do you think it's something that you'd perhaps like to get into in the future, or not really?
Oh, look, only the odd occasions. I mean, I do on occasions, but it's pretty rare, It's maybe 2 or 3 times a year.
Oh, okay.
If the weather's bad, I might sit in here and look at doing so. Oh, yeah, maybe I'll just give this a go.
Sure.
But even then, I'd prefer to go and sit out in the garden where I'm still in the open air
Right.
to paint a flower.
Sure. Makes sense. You have painted in some picturesque countries around the world, including England, China, and Italy. Can you recollect your memories from these trips and share your observations on how watercolour painting, and more generally, how traditional realism is being kept alive in these countries?
Yeah, when I went to England with Ray Hewitt, we sitting down in St Ives,
Sure.
having a paint one day, and there was a group of other artists there. I got chatting to them, and I found out that they were members of what's called the Wapping Group,
Okay.
who have been around for quite a few years, and I actually had their book.
Oh, did you? Okay.
And what they do mostly is to go up and down the Thames, finding different spots, and they paint together as a group.
Right.
And they're not easy to get into, and they weren't all that sort of forthcoming in wanting to have other artists come along and join them, even though we were from overseas
Right.
on another day. But they did give us spots to go and paint at. I looked at a few little galleries around St Ives and down at Mousehole and places like that, and there's quite a market out there for some of the artists that are well known, Peter Brown and people like that are really good traditional artists, and there's quite a market for them. So yeah, I found that in England, while there is a lot of sort of contemporary and other sort of art going around, there is a market there for traditional art. I found the same in Italy. But China was the place that really got me, because I went there as part of a group, and we got to visit the schools where they teach and look at the things they go through. And apart from having to be certain amount academically gifted, they had to be good, creative, and technically good. They teach them to be technically good, and there's a real market in China for traditional art.
Sure.
Or as I tend to term it as traditional art, but whether that's the correct term, I'm not sure. But sort of traditional realism, and they churn out. I don't know, these poor kids must, paint until their fingers are, worn to the bone, and they just do some fantastic work.
Sure.
It was quite incredible what they were doing. So the Chinese are very big on training them to do exactly right.
Sure.
What I did find with them though was that when we went to their art gallery, and a few of us did demonstrations, that they liked the way that we were just a little bit freer.
Okay.
With what we did. Okay, so that we didn't structure ourselves into a particular, into a corner where we had to do it a certain way. We were just a little bit looser and freer. And if this wasn't working this way, then we might just do something and alter it.
Sure.
So they were quite taken with that. They thought, I don't think they're the sort of things you can teach people.
Sure.
You know, you either do that or, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. So technically, Ted, with the watercolorists in China, did you find that their work was a lot more superior to the watercolorists here in Australia?
Oh no, they're not superior, but they're certainly they're trained. You can see their training.
Mm.
You know, it comes out in their work.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit like the. I find there's a lot of sameness in a lot of them,
Mm.
and the same with a lot of their oil painters that come out here now. I don't know if you've ever studied some of their works
Mm.
and the different, Chinese oil painters that have come to Australia and paint. That a lot of them paint the same way.
Mm.
Their brush strokes are the same.
Mm-hmm.
So I find there's a lot of sameness in their work. Certainly
Sure.
the quality is second to none,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a lot of sameness in there.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
Do you feel like drawing is something that's more emphasized in China?
Yeah, it's very strong. They're very strong on drawing,
Mm-hmm.
and they're very strong on painting things correctly.
Sure. Sure.
They need to do things correctly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. In 2009, Julian Bruer, Mary Hyde, Ray Hewitt, John Hunt, and yourself formed a group known as Five. Can you explain how this group was established and what its philosophy is?
Yeah, philosophy is a word that probably goes missing with Five. No, we got together as a group. At the time, John Hunt was president of the Victorian Artists Society. Julian and Mary, Ray Hewitt were all on council, and I was the secretary manager. And often after our meetings, once a month, we'd go down to Tiamo's in Carlton.
Mm.
And, we'd have a coffee and we'd talk about the real matters that needed to be done at the Vic Arts that you can't put in the minutes.
Mm.
Right? And we were just sitting around having a coffee and thinking, 20 Melbourne have got their exhibition coming up soon and, they're not coming back to the Vics this year. Well, maybe we should have an exhibition ourselves and, we'll take their space.
Mm-hmm.
So it was sort of said a bit flippantly, but it was taken up and, yeah, why not? Okay, we'll do that. So we had another meeting at Max's Cafe over here in Essendon.
Okay.
Essendon. And we sat around, and in the meantime, I'd knocked up a couple of, mock-ups for, how we might do our invitations. And
Mm-hmm.
we decided we're going to do a little booklet, 20-page booklet or something. And, we'd each have 4 pages and things like that. And we needed to come up with a title. What are we going to call ourselves, And it was Julian Bruer who said, well, we'll call it Five.
Mm.
I said, what, the Five? No, not the Five, just Five. Well, maybe we can go French and call ourselves, deux, trois, quatre, cinq. We do this. No, we just call ourselves Five. So we say, yeah, okay, we'll call it Five. Not going to talk about this for hours. Call ourselves Five. We booked in the galleries at the Victorian Artists Society, and we set it up. And as much as anything, it was to fill a void within the gallery bookings.
Okay. Right.
And we took out the hire of the gallery where there was another. We used to have permanent bookings back then, and
Okay.
some of them sort of disbanded and others moved on. There were people like the ANA that used to have their regular booking. Believe it or not, that a lot of doctors paint.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
frustrated artists, a lot of them.
It's good therapy.
Especially the surgeons. They're all
Sure.
frustrated.
Steady hands.
Yeah, they're sort of. I think their mother told them that you're not going to make any money painting. Go out and be a doctor. So we filled that void, and it was a success. People enjoyed it. So we decided to stick with it. We've had one sort of ever since. It sort of dropped off. Ray dropped out. Not because he didn't like us anymore, just because he dropped out.
Sure.
He had other things happening. There was, then John decided that he was going to up and move to Germany.
Okay.
We still had a number of his paintings here, so we used to put him in sort of incognito.
Right.
And we just put him in. And we brought in a couple of people who become flexible.
Okay.
So we've had Bob Senior and we've had Barbara McManus that have come into the group for a year, and we've brought in Lucille Tam, who's become a permanent fixture.
Sure.
So there's three mainstays, and that's Julie and Mary and myself.
Sure.
And then Lucille has become a mainstay now, when she finds the time to paint, that is, because she's busy with family business and things. And to be honest with you, we're all good friends, and we just love what we do.
Sure.
And, we like holding the exhibition, and it's good to be able to see your work on display on its own.
Sure.
Okay?
Right.
It's like a solo exhibition. We take the 3 galleries upstairs. We keep all our own work separate. So it's like having 5 separate solo shows.
Right. Fantastic.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if you've been into an exhibition. You go into a Rotary show, you put your work up, you think it's okay, and it'll get stuck next to something that's bright and loud, and all of a sudden it's killing it. Could get stuck somewhere else, could be down on the ground, could be up high, could be above the ladies' loo, could be anywhere. You don't get a real appreciation of your own work until you see it all up together.
Sure.
And that's when you get to think, well, suddenly you're not comparing it with someone else who's next to you and thinking, gee, that's a good painting, it makes me look bad. You just get to see your own work. So I think it's a good idea, and I think part of our philosophy really, it's to show you, as much as anything, we use it, for our students to show them. So, this is where you've got to get to.
Sure.
If you're serious about it, and we might bring a student into Five and say, look, you're here. Do you really need to stay a student? Right. I think there becomes a time as a student, which is getting off the track a bit, I know, but there becomes a time as a student where you really have to say, well, I think I've learned all I can learn as far as using the medium. It's up to me now to go out and just paint. And that's when you start to develop your own style. Sure. You just go out and paint.
Go out and paint, absolutely. So in a nutshell, Ted, would you say the kind of philosophy of Five is basically based on the ethos of tonal impressionist painting?
Yeah, sure. John Hunt is probably the only one who goes away from that. John's work is quite sort of modern and almost semi-abstract-y.
Okay.
But it's a good foil to have.
Sure.
It's good to have that difference when you have people who sort of more of the tonal realist, impressionist style of painting, even though we're all different, to have someone who's a little bit left of field.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
One of your biggest achievements to date is winning the ANL Maritime Art Award, valued at $15,000 in 2017, with your painting titled Workhorse on the Orwell, that was inspired from a trip in 2015 to East Anglia in Britain. What was your reaction when you had found out that you won?
I was speechless. Actually, I didn't know until I read my name out on the night.
Sure.
That I'd actually won it, and I didn't have any speeches prepared or anything. And I got up there, and apart from the ANL being the major sponsor, the Australian National Lines, I didn't really remember who else was the Mission to Seafarers who put the show on. Which is just a lovely little building. I don't know if you've ever been in there, but down in Flinders Street. And I was pretty gobsmacked, to be quite honest with you. it was the first time a watercolourist had won the major prize,
Wow.
and technically it didn't fit the brief. It was that their brief was to have a painting that was no more than 1.4 metres square.
Okay.
My painting was framed 1.5 metres.
Okay.
And
Right.
I got in touch with them prior to the show and said, look, I'm 1.5 wide, but I'm only sort of 1.1 metre deep.
Mm.
Does that fit in? Is that okay? Will you accept it? And they said, yeah, they'd accept it.
Oh, great.
Right. And sometimes you do a painting and you feel within yourself that it's worked. And you just think, I just know that I've got a good painting here.
Mm.
It had been in other shows and had been overlooked and didn't really gain a mention.
Mm-hmm.
But I just felt that in myself it was a good painting.
Mm-hmm.
It was maritime in the sense that it had a couple of old barges that
Okay.
you see a lot of in England.
Mm-hmm.
And it was down in Ipswich, down on the wharf in Ipswich.
Yeah.
It was just a beautiful little place. And these barges that were surrounded by, you know, modern day gantry cranes and things that you see. And I thought, well, I just felt that it was working. And I felt in myself it was a good painting. And I don't often get that sort of feeling about a painting.
Sure.
You know, sometimes I might think it's good, but if it's good, it's subjective, isn't it? You know, and it's really for other people to decide. But I just felt in myself that I'd had a good painting. So I put it in the show. I got a call that day to say, you know, you're coming to the opening because you haven't responded to our RSVPs. And I found out when I got there that Mary Hyde had also got the same message.
Mm-hmm.
Julian had got the message. Someone else had got the message. And I figured that was just a message that they'd sent out to all the artists who hadn't RSVP'd for the night.
Sure.
And when they read my name out, I was ecstatic because I'd never won anything like that before.
Mm-hmm.
I sent a message home to my wife. I said, I've just won the big prize. And I put 15K. She thought I'd won $15 and wondered why I was getting so excited. Yeah.
That's
and
fantastic.
It was. It never happened again.
Well, not yet, anyway. So that painting that you done for the A&L prize, Ted, was that one that you had used a painted sketch as a reference for a studio painting?
Yeah, I'd done a fairly rough sketch. Probably, you know, a 10-minute watercolour sketch that I'd done down there at the time. It was a bit of a wet, miserable day, and it was no good setting up my easel where I wanted to be, getting rained on and ended up with little dots on it. I wouldn't have had a finished painting out of it. So I did a rough sketch. And then I took a photo, and from the two of them I worked hand in hand when I came back.
Right.
When I came back home, I just thought, I think this will make a good big painting.
Sure.
I had a roll of watercolour paper,
mm-hmm.
and I got out the roll, and I thought, yeah, the roll's sort of 1.4 metres high. I'll just cut a length off, and you know,
mm-hmm.
then I'll have a go at it. And
mm-hmm.
it's a challenge to do a big painting like that.
Sure.
You know, but it's all good. I mean, it's, you know, it's enjoyable. Sometimes you just feel it. It didn't take me long to do the painting.
Right.
Sometimes you can just feel it at the time. You think, yeah, I'm sure I can do this, and you just go for it,
mm-hmm.
and it just happens,
mm-hmm.
and it comes together.
Great.
And when they come together like that, you just know within yourself that, you know, you've got a good painting.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Did winning the A&L award, do you feel like it brought your work more recognition?
In some circles it did, certainly. You know, a lot of exhibitions you can go into now, they're prejudged before they're accepted into the show.
Okay.
Which is, you know, they're vetted. It's a bit like Camberwell, you know. They might get 3,000 entries, but only 1,500 will get into the show. So the rest of them, you've done your entry fee. That's bad luck.
Sure.
Okay. So a lot of shows are now vetted before they're accepted into a show, and you find that quite often now, your name's automatic. You know, your paintings are automatic accepted.
Sure.
So yeah, there's a little bit of recognition. I get called on to judge.
Yeah.
A lot more now than I did, and I get called on for demos.
Absolutely.
You know.
Right. And you're still happy to judge and give demos?
Yeah.
Nowadays?
Look, I get a little bit nervous with judging, but I enjoy it, and I like it when I'm sort of called back to give my reasons for why I'm on it, rather than just, you know, giving the prizes, then collecting your money and going home, and no one ever knows why you picked that painting.
Sure.
You know, so I like to be able to, you know, especially the country shows, you can go along, you stay overnight, and you go back that night when they're reading out the winners. You get to say something and say, look, you know, the reason I picked this painting was because of this reason.
Sure.
People don't have to agree with you, but at least they can understand why you did it, you know.
Right, yeah.
And the other thing with judging is that, you know, you might get 200 people at an opening, and 199 of them will say, why did he pick that? But one person, the winner, well, you'll have a best friend for life.
That's true. After winning the A&L award, you said, quote, to anyone who wonders if they are ever going to win anything, I'd say believe in what you are doing and keep at it, unquote. A great piece of advice indeed. What has kept you believing in what you do all of these years and continuing to paint? Is it simply the love of painting, or are you in search of the perfect composition which you haven't found yet?
Yeah, the last bit, I hope I never find it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm always searching for trying to get better. You know? I look at my work sometimes and I think, oh, you know, it's not that great. And, you know, it could be better. It could be better if I do this. Sometimes I might do a painting 3 or 4 times before I'm actually satisfied with it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think if, you know, as an artist, if that doesn't happen to you, then you're not being honest with yourself.
Sure.
You know, if you're happy with every piece of work you ever do, you're not being honest.
No.
You know, to be a painter or an artist, you've got to be honest with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, other people will be honest with you. Your own family, they can be a good judge and say, oh, I don't like that, I like that. And, you know, feelings don't come into it. But you've got to be honest with yourself.
That's great advice.
You know, and, you know, you shouldn't be putting up a piece of work if you're not satisfied yourself.
Sure.
You know, I tend to quote what I say to my students a lot because, you know, I often say to them that, you know, you paint something, and if you're worried about the outcome, if you're worried about, oh, what'll happen if I do this, don't worry about it, just do it.
Sure.
Because if it doesn't work out, nobody else will ever see it.
Sure.
Because you won't show it to them.
That's right.
You know?
That's right.
So you never have to be worried. I often hear people say, oh, I'm scared of this sheet of blank paper. Well, I'll look at a sheet of blank paper and say, why haven't I got something on it? Blank paper doesn't scare me.
Sure.
You know?
Right.
I guess I've always had a little bit of self-confidence in my painting, and that was probably because, you know, when I was 8 years old, my mum telling me that's good.
Yeah.
And I believed her, and I've had that confidence. Recently, I ran into some school friends that, not school friends so much, they were people I went to school with. They came up and introduced themselves to me at an exhibition I had. said, "Oh, you're Ted Dansey. You probably don't remember me."
Yeah.
And I said, and straight away I'm thinking high school. I don't know, I don't recognise you. Who could this be? He said, "Well, we went to Bops together," which is now St Oliver's, but you know, those days it was Blessed Oliver Plunkett's. And they showed me a photo, and you know, there's 60 kids in the class and all this sort of stuff. And I said, "How did you remember me?" And they said, "Well, you were the only kid who was allowed to draw on the blackboard." And we always knew you were going to be an artist. And that's how they remembered me. I guess those little things, I'd completely forgotten that, you know, I was the kid who was allowed to draw on the blackboard.
That's fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, Ted, let me ask you this. What do you think your life would be like if you didn't choose to become a painter?
Pretty boring. Yeah, pretty dull, I guess. I don't know what else I would have been, because I've always harboured that desire to want to paint. So I probably would have done anything, you know. I worked in a factory, and you know, I laid sleepers. Bit of labour work, I don't think hurts anybody. But I always did it with the view that it was never going to be permanent.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I could have worked in a factory if that was going to be my life ambition, to stay there and work in a factory. I don't think I could have done that. Knowing that I was trying to get somewhere else was okay. I was happy to work in a factory.
Sure.
I grew up in Glenroy back in the days when, you know, in the late 50s, 60s and 70s. And, you know, the late 60s or the early 60s, that wasn't that long after the war. It was a very working class suburb. There was, you know, my parents had a war service home, and a lot of people lived in housing commission homes. So Glenroy was a different place to live.
Sure.
It was, you know, it was certainly different from where we lived in Tasmania at Beauty Point. You know, Beauty Point was, I don't know if you're familiar with Beauty Point, but it's about 5 kilometres from Beaconsfield. Beaconsfield is working class mining area prior to the mine collapse. And Beauty Point it's, you know, like living down in Williamstown overlooking the water. You know, It's sought after real estate. So certainly moving from Tasmania, you know, where we lived on the water and everything was so picturesque and country like a big country on the water, you know. Like some of those, you know, the south coast of Sydney and, you know, around places like that. It was just beautiful. And come to Glenroy, it was very working class. A lot of open paddocks, no made roads.
Wow.
No sewage that came through later.
Yeah.
You know, so things were different back then. But it was a good place to grow up. I mean, you know, I suppose I grew up, I guess, with improvise and compromise were the two words that I grew up with. You know, if we couldn't afford it, you had to improvise, or you had to compromise and use something else.
Sure.
You know, you probably hear old people talking about, oh yeah, we used to kick the footy around the front out in the street, and it was made up from old newspapers. We'd roll it up and tie it and kick it around. Well, you know, we did that. And we never thought of that was just, you know, some kid got a footy, that was suddenly your best friend, you know. When they didn't have the footy, I don't play with you anymore.
So considering that, Ted, in Glenroy during your earlier years, was it considered to be an artist? Was that something that was considered to be a little bit unconventional or not really common, perhaps?
It wasn't common. Not only being an artist, you know, I had a couple of friends that I went to school with that, I met up with him years later, and we were having a chat, and he's a piano teacher. And I said, "Oh, I didn't know you played the piano." And he said, "Well, you didn't actually brag about it when you were going to school at Hatfield High, because it was, a little bit left of field."
Sure.
I always got into trouble for drawing in class, and it came in handy at times, because I was also big on handwriting things. So if anyone was going to wag school, I'd be writing the notes for them.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll do that for you. Just give me 10 bob. That was like, pulling in $50 now. But, you get a few bob for writing there, sign it off, Mrs. Brown or Mrs. No, Paul can't come to school. So
That's
a bit of
fascinating.
fun. I don't know what the students are like today, but I often look at teachers like yourself and I think, boy, I don't know if the students have changed since my day, but we weren't the ideal students.
Sure.
Yeah, and in fact, very few students went on to do leaving or matric. Your fifth and sixth form HSC as they do now. Most of the kids I went to school with had left by Form 3.
Wow.
Or
Okay.
year 9.
Yeah.
And to go and do an apprenticeship somewhere. I went on to year 10. Couldn't wait to get out of school. I just wasn't academically inclined. It's just
Sure. Well, thankfully you stuck with your drawing, and look at you today.
Well, but I guess I was lucky. But that's what I always wanted to be, and I think you still got to work at it.
Absolutely.
And I don't care. A lot of people might be gifted in any field, but if you don't work on developing it, it's not worth anything to you.
That's true.
I went to school with kids who were, one guy who was a neighbour of mine. He could play footy or cricket. He'd play cricket left hand or right hand. He could bowl left hand or right hand. He was a fantastic cricketer. He could have gone on and played state cricket, and who knows where it would have taken him. He just didn't have the discipline.
Sure.
As soon as he was old enough to drive, him and his mates decided to go around Australia and just, bum around and do nothing. So it doesn't matter how good you are at something if you're not prepared to sort of stick with it. It's not worth anything.
Sure. Wise words, Ted. What are the plans for your work as we look towards the future?
Well, to try and just keep working on expanding, I guess. Expanding what I'm doing. Seeing where it takes me. I don't have a goal to be in this spot. My goal is to keep working at it and just see where it takes me.
Do you see yourself slowing down as you're getting older?
Oh, look, I probably will. I mean, I'm sort of semi-retired now, apart from a bit of teaching. I get a part pension and I get a superannuation combined, and I'm sort of comfortable to keep living on that. And the teaching is something that keeps me active. It's nice to be able to part on something that
Absolutely.
Things that you've learned, you can part on to someone else who might, I'd love it to be able to tutor someone who went on to become famous, knowing that I had a hand in it.
Absolutely. It's a good feeling.
Yeah.
Sure. Approaching the end of the interview, after having painted for over 35 years as a realist in Australia, do you see the realist tradition growing with the new generation of art students, or is it only being maintained by older painters?
To a degree, it's being maintained. Well, it's being passed on by older painters, by their knowledge. I think one of the great disappointments in art, I think, is when they closed the National Gallery School here in Victoria. I know that Sydney still run the, Julian Ashton School, And you know, when I look at some of the artists that I've known over the years that have come through that National Gallery School, just fantastic painters.
Absolutely.
You know,
Definitely.
because they've been taught that discipline, and they've also been taught to think like an artist
Mhm.
for themselves. It's a great shame that because I think we have a void that now has to be. So, you know, artists now have learned from people who've gone through the National Gallery,
Mhm.
so they're lucky in that way.
Mhm.
And they're being able to pass it on.
Mhm.
But to not have the National Gallery School, you know, it's something I think that the Victorian Artists Society are trying to get more into,
Mhm.
in a sense, but it's very difficult to do that, you know.
So when you say trying to get more into it, you mean like revive it?
I think they'd like to, like the National Gallery School was sort of disbanded and taken over by Melbourne University,
That's right.
probably back in 1970 or something.
Mhm.
It was a long time ago,
Yeah.
and I think it's lost its way from there.
Yeah.
Right? I
Yeah.
believe Laurie Pendlebury might have been in charge of it at the time, and certainly after he passed on, I think a lot of that was lost.
Mhm.
There was a bit of a modernist movement that didn't see the purpose.
Mhm.
Everything had to be expressionist and creative and come out of your mind. Don't worry about, you know, being able to, you know, draw a cup to look like a cup. Just draw it how you make it feel, you know.
Sure.
So a lot of that sort of thing went on, which is in itself is not a bad thing. I just think you need a bit of grounding. And that's what traditional art will give you, that grounding. It's, you know, it's a bit like everything. If you're playing cricket and you're having a bad trot, they send you back to the seconds so that you can then get your confidence back up and start again.
Mm.
And you need a bit of grounding so that if your traditional art suddenly takes you into abstract and it's not working, you've got something to come back to and start again.
Absolutely.
And so that's where you find out why isn't it working. It's because you've forgotten what you were doing.
Absolutely. Yeah,
And I think
agree.
it's the same
100%.
it's the same with everything in life. You know, art's no different to everything in life.
It's true.
Everything we do, you know, if you don't have something to fall back on, you're never going to know where you went wrong.
That's right. That's great advice.
You know, you need a bit of grounding somewhere.
Definitely. Absolutely. What would you suggest are things which we as students, artists, teachers and supporters of traditional realism can do to continue to maintain our great tradition into the future?
Draw. Yeah, in a nutshell, draw. Especially tonal sketching and drawing. I find that water-soluble graphite is a great drawing tool. You might splash around with a bit of water, but it's still drawing. I think drawing is the foundation. Yeah.
That's interesting. So, do you feel like, as if one was to develop the competence in drawing, they could easily pick up whether it's painting in oil or watercolor later on?
Yeah, what it does is, well, drawing you're working minimal tones anyway. You've only got black and white, you know. And what it does is it helps you create an affiliation with the subject, right? So that suddenly when you come to paint it, you know exactly how you're going to paint it. You know what you're going to do. You know where you're going to put your darks and your lights, and you almost don't have to look at the subject again. So, you know, drawing is just a great tool. You know, it's a great discipline to have.
Sure, definitely.
And I used to draw because I loved drawing, and I never realised until I started painting and that just how much I rely on those drawing skills in teaching me about getting to know your subject, tones, things you tend to take for granted.
Absolutely.
That you do, you know. It's like when you're teaching someone who's never painted before and never drawn before, and you find that, okay, you're doing those things, but you've been doing them all your life, and all of a sudden you're having to try and, how difficult it is for someone to just pick it up in retirement and start drawing. It's not that easy.
It isn't, no.
You know, it's something you develop, and it's not even something you need to be taught, drawing. Something you can actually teach yourself by just looking at what other painters and drawers and looking at drawings over the years, that, you know, picking up, you know, some of Leonardo's books and his sketches and looking at what he's done, you know, seeing how he's approached drawing.
Sure.
You know, the Michelangelo drawings and some of the great artists who have drawn, they've all drawn, they can all draw.
Sure.
You know, some of the best artists around today, like Joseph Zbukvik, he could draw anything. He could draw with his eyes closed, I think. He makes me sick. He's a good guy. Julian Bruer, another friend of mine, he can draw anything. He's a fantastic drawer. You know, my drawings are, I don't go into the detail that they do.
Sure.
Occasionally I might, but when I was younger, I used to put in every little bit of detail. You know, because I'd looked at people like Leonardo and people like that and seen how detailed their drawings are, and I wanted to be like that.
Sure.
Then somewhere about, you know, certainly my later high school years, we didn't really have an art teacher. We used to get anybody, like the geography teacher or the English teacher, would come in and sit in the class and let you do what you wanted. But we did have one guy there, Grant Furlong, and he sort of started talking about, you know, traditional sort of, different sort of art, traditional art that was more loose, and, you know, I thought, oh, okay, I really like that. How do these people make these little dots and dashes look like real people?
Right.
You know what I mean? So I sort of stepped out of that bit where I was trying to draw real people. So I could say, yeah, I know who that is. You know, it was this big, but I knew that, yeah, that's my Uncle Ben. So, you know, just doing dots and dashes and looking and say, there's a person there.
Wow.
You know,
incredible.
Yeah.
So this particular teacher that you encountered was back when you were in
Hadfield
High
I was
School.
in Hadfield High School.
Yeah.
He'd come from a signwriting background of all things.
Oh, okay.
I remember, you know, when I started in Hadfield High School, there was an Australian watercolourist by the name of John Borak was teaching there, and he was quite well known. And had I gone, you know, into the next year, he was going to be my teacher.
Okay.
And I was kind of looking forward to that. But he decided to leave teaching. And all of a sudden we didn't have a teacher.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. So that would have been your first real introduction to you know, the kind of painting that you today carry on with. Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah.
So considering drawing, Ted, nowadays, do you find drawing something that's easy, or do you still struggle with it?
No, look, I find it relatively, as a process, I find it relatively easy. Certain subjects I still struggle with. I find it makes me concentrate a lot, and I like that. You know, I like to get a subject where I have to concentrate on it.
Sure.
You know, not just sort of, you know, I'll do a few lines, you know, just do this, just do that. Even if I'm, you know, even when I do that sort of broad sort of block-in type of sketching, I still have to concentrate. that I put it in the right place, you know. I'm still looking at, you know, the composition of the thirds and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So drawing, you still need to be able to have it in your mind. You've got a composition there,
Right.
you know.
Definitely.
And you know, I don't always just slap things on the paper. They've got to be positioned in the right place.
Sure. Sure.
You know, drawing like painting, every pencil stroke has a purpose.
Right.
You know,
Definitely.
even if it's only to help you find where you should be.
Right.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
even if its only purpose is to show you that it's wrong,
Mm-hmm.
it still has a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Every brushstroke has a purpose,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's only to tell you that you got it wrong.
Sure.
It served a purpose to tell me that I got it wrong. So
Yeah, well, every stroke, every line
Yeah.
builds off the next.
yeah,
Because
exactly.
you're always judging it in accordance to what's already on the page.
Yeah.
Sure. For anybody who is thinking of moving into the medium of watercolor, what advice would you give them?
Just do it. Just do it. Yeah. If you feel comfortable, just give it a go. I would say that find a reputable teacher.
Yeah.
And someone who's going to help sort of guide you out of some of the mistakes that you can make in watercolour. Because while it's okay to paint with it, you can make mistakes. You don't always know why you make those mistakes. And it's good to know if you can get someone that you make a mistake, they can come along and say, look, the reason that happened is because of this.
Yeah, definitely.
You find with watercolour most of the time, it's the timing.
Mm.
You need to work, if you're working light to dark, you're working from thin washes up to thicker paint.
Mm-hmm.
What I find a lot of students is they'll go in too early with their mid-tones,
Mm-hmm.
then they'll try and put a wash over the top and they end up with an unholy mess
Mm.
and don't know why.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to put a wash over something, it's got to be dry.
Right.
You know.
Right.
So it's a glazing technique. The difference between a glaze and a wash, I guess, is you put your wash down early when there's nothing on the paper.
Mm-hmm.
Glaze is when you put a wash over the top of
Something that's already dry. Yeah.
already dry, and that has to be dry.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
In your opinion, Ted, today, who are some of the leading Australian watercolour painters?
Yeah, look, that's pretty simple, I guess. Most of the great watercolourists you'll find are very strong in Melbourne
Mm-hmm.
for some reason. People like David Taylor, Joseph Zbukvic, Ross Patterson, Greg Allen, Alvaro Castanet, who living in Uruguay but was, teaching here in Australia for a long time, living here. I put my own buddy Julian Bruer,
Mm-hmm.
I think he's right up there with the best. There's just so many, there's a lot of good painters out there.
Sure.
I find people like Ev Hales as, extraordinary sort of watercolourist in the way she can manipulate things.
Mm-hmm.
If she's doing a demonstration, she'll quite often do it upside down, so she's standing behind the painting
Wow.
and everyone gets to see it. I think that's, an incredible skill that, that she only picked up because there was a need for her not to stand in front of a painting when she was demonstrating.
That's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah. So there's a lot of good painters out there, but a lot of them who don't make it.
Sure.
Because you've got that top 1 and 2% out of all the painters that are around, and a lot of good painters, there's only 1 or 2%, you could truly say that not only are they making a living, but they're making enough to do whatever they want to do in life.
That's great, isn't it?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
In conclusion, for viewers who may be interested in studying with you, You currently teach at the Uniting Church Hall in Strathmore and the Lewis Joel Arts and Community Centre in Altona, as well as through Sussex Neighbourhood House in Pascoe Vale. Are there any other places you will be teaching this year?
No, there isn't, and I'm sort of cutting back on a lot of my teaching. I find night classes tend to, if you go to a night class, you get fuzzy, Ted. Right? It's the end of the day. They don't know, but that's okay because they're a bit fuzzy too. I quite enjoy going over to Altona to the Louis Joel Centre. And the Sussex Neighbourhood House is one I picked up because there was another artist who taught there, Ben Winspear, who
Sure.
you've heard of.
Sure.
Well, Ben was teaching there, and I think he gave it away for some reason. I think it was because he wanted to concentrate all his classes out of senior art supplies involved.
Okay, yeah.
And he was looking at doing that. So he was giving it up, and I just got in touch with him. I said, I heard you're after a tutor, and I'm interested if you want to give it a go. So I started teaching there. They're very beginners, right? So I'm starting with very beginners who are senior artists. Okay. I don't want to say they're old people because they're only my age. And I don't like to think of myself as being old, but, they're advanced students. And the ones at the Louis Joel Centre are probably a little bit more advanced.
Okay.
So they're sort of the intermediate style, and I find that they're easier to teach. Okay. The raw beginners are a lot harder to teach. It's fun, but we keep that class. We'll probably break it up into 2 classes next year. I think.
Okay.
Mostly because of COVID. They need to social distance, so we can't get too close to each other. And there'll be less students in the class. We'll probably break it down about 6 or 8 per class.
Sure. So you welcome, with your teaching, Ted, you welcome all types of students, beginners, intermediate, advanced?
I do, but advanced students I tend to keep out of. They're more workshop students.
Okay.
So workshops are more, intermediate to advanced.
Okay.
Not beginners.
Right.
Beginners are something I take on in a class with beginners to intermediate.
Okay, sure.
Because you can spend a little bit more time with them.
Right.
Beginners you have to spend a lot of time with. They're a little bit more intermediate to advanced. You don't have to spend as much time with them. You show them what you're doing, they'll just go back and do it. Beginners will ask a lot of questions and you spend a lot of time with them.
Sure.
And it isn't fair, I guess, on everybody if you're spending a lot of time with one student and not with everybody. You've got to be able to get around.
Definitely, yeah. And the students notice that as well.
Oh, yeah, they do, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Now, for viewers who may be watching, Ted, if they wanted to come study with you, what would be the best way for them to get in touch?
Through my email, which is teddansey@gmail.com.
Okay.
Keep it simple, Ted Dansey with 2 Ds.
Sure.
And through my phone number, I guess, my 0417 322 970.
Fantastic. And are you on Instagram or Facebook?
Yeah, I have an Instagram account and a Facebook account, and I have a web account.
A website?
A website which is, I don't tend to keep up to date as I should. I originally thought that I'd spend an hour a week keeping it up to date, but it's more like an hour every 6 months.
Sure.
Because I don't look at it myself, so I can't expect other people to look at it, can I?
Sure. Well, That's fantastic, Ted. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today and to elaborate your life and your work. Uh, Watching you paint is truly magical. Seeing your experience and your mileage over the years, the way you handle the brush and your brushmanship and your fine subject matter, the cityscapes and the landscapes, it's really inspiring. And I do wish you the very best from here on out. And I look forward to seeing how your work continues to develop into the future.
Well, thanks very much, Amelia. It's been a pleasure, actually, and it's been a lot of fun. So hopefully somebody will get something from it.
Yeah, I'm sure they will.
I'm sure if they don't, they'll just switch it off. But hopefully they will. And yeah, good luck with your future as well.
Great, thank you.
You know, teaching those high school kids. Don't know if you've had any of them jump out the window and go and play sport or anything yet, but that was yeah.
No worries.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thanks very much,
no worries.
Amelia.
All the best to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.